2017, Capcom published Resident Evil 7 for the Sony PlayStation 4, personal computer, Xbox One, and in 2018 for the Nintendo Switch. The game focused on the character of Ethan Winters, as he had searched for the woman he loved by the name of Mia through a plantation in Louisiana within the United States of America. The game was highly respected by the gaming community and critics alike due to the fact that it was a, quote, return to what the Resident Evil franchise was like, end quote. The main character of Ethan Winters was a semi-anonymous individual that the player controlled in an attempt to survive the situation that he had found himself in, and while he attempted to find Mia, he had to survive and escape against and from the Baker family. Theories have emerged as to how and why the game was so popular at the time and so acclaimed as well in the character of Ethan Winters, and how he fit into the lore of Resident Evil or the Resident Evil gaming universe. Prior to the release of Resident Evil 7, Capcom had been under intense criticism from the gaming community as well as critics due to the fact that since roughly the era of Resident Evil 3, the franchise hadn't exactly focused on the details of horror, but officially and clearly actioned from Resident Evil 4 on the games published afterwards. Resident Evil 4 was originally released in 2005 for the Nintendo GameCube, and until Resident Evil 6, released in 2012, was nearly a decade of games that were lacking in-game plot, more of an action-themed premise, and convoluted storyline that many fans were not exactly fond of. Capcom had promoted Resident Evil 7 as different from the prior games, which was very important as online discussions actually had claims, from the player point of view, of being a possible reboot for the franchise. The character of Ethan Winters, in terms of his appearance, was intentionally left vague on purpose. There were few depictions of Ethan Winters in-game. Most in-game examples of Ethan never ever showed his face, because Capcom at the time wanted to test out a largely or mostly vague character that gamers could be somewhat represented or interested at the same time and focus on the gaming experience, more so than the lack of a credible protagonist that characters would normally associate with the Resident Evil franchise. They wanted someone anonymous, someone different, rather than someone established in prior games. Ethan throughout the game was viewed and depicted as an average man with no special abilities, training, intelligence, or motivation other than finding the woman that he loved. The game concludes with Ethan, through events of the game, being able to save Mia, but the game concludes that he also gets help from Chris Redfield, and the realization that the details towards the end of the game have it being distantly related to the Resident Evil franchise. From the beginning of the game to roughly the middle of the game, there were few, if any, actual references to the Resident Evil lore or the main Resident Evil franchise. Online discussion had it that for a good amount of the game, as mentioned, there were little to no connections to the established Resident Evil universe, and gamers liked that fact overwhelmingly because it was a fresh, new take on the Resident Evil franchise, bringing it back to what it was, rather than what it had become. And the fact that Ethan Winters, someone with no history with the Resident Evil franchise, would embark on a quest to save his wife in a Resident Evil themed world, not exactly with details or facts from the Resident Evil universe. The fact that Chris Redfield made an appearance towards the end of the game to formally connect Resident Evil 7 to the established Resident Evil universe, as mentioned, was a source of complaints by some gamers. A good amount of the gaming population actually enjoyed it being mostly that of a standalone game. Later on, the fact that Capcom remade Resident Evil 2 and 3 due to mostly as a success with Resident Evil 7 led many to believe that there was indeed a lack of clarity with Capcom's lead or direction for the Resident Evil franchise, and that the characters in the Resident Evil franchise, the established characters, had become convoluted as mentioned, and the allure of a brand new or vague character such as Ethan Winters was very much welcome, even with the details and circumstances that had occurred in Resident Evil 8. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because it's not the character that was forgotten, it was the details of why they were forgotten.